what happened at LinkedIn when, basically you had to go to fully virtual events?
Yeah, so we had always had a virtual element to it, but it wasn't the primary, right? So we would do, let's say, our internal bi-weekly CEO address to the whole company. That was every 2 weeks. There was a streaming element to it, and then there was an in-person piece. When COVID hit, it became fully virtual, and so it was virtual both from an audience perspective, a production perspective, and a talent perspective. Everybody was virtual, as we all know. So we actually shifted, we simplified, and we went to a solution that basically did everything in the cloud. So at the time we were using Blue Jeans, and they had, or probably still do have, like an events platform. We're using that to kind of do the production, very basic production by anyone's standards. But and then the talent was coming in over Blue Jeans, and the audience were watching a streamed version of that show. So that was our initial pivot, was to simplify. The content still had to get out there. So that was for our internal. For our external, we essentially were using LinkedIn Live for that piece. So in comparison to hybrid that came next, in a way, while the transition to fully virtual was tricky because you had to get buy-in from everybody that this was okay, both from a production standpoint and from a technology standpoint, which is where we did hit some of our limitations, was just the number of people joining these streams. In a way that was, once we had it figured out, it was easy. And then we'll come to later, is the hybrid side of things. So we got into a really good rhythm, fully virtual. We felt very satisfied and very happy with what we were producing.
So is the production piece of it kind of the same for whether you're doing it internal or if you're going external with LinkedIn Live, or
No,
different workflows?
What we were doing for virtual there, we're using StreamYard in that particular case, so a different tool to kind of do it, but essentially the same idea where everything's done with one tool instead of us piecing tools together. Again, I guess audience wasn't watching on StreamYard, but for our capture, we're using StreamYard to bring in the talent, and then our crew were dialed in to be able to control it. So, yeah, for both sides of things, it just became all cloud-based essentially.
Okay, Eric, do you want me to show those slides?
Then I'll talk about this just a second. But previous to COVID, most of our events were in person with a camera. So we would webcast if you couldn't be there, and it was primarily just watch whatever was happening on stage. Not a whole lot put into the experience for the virtual audience. And so, like I said, I work for our space division. There we have a yearly gathering of our executives and their direct reports, which has always been in person. And suddenly, in fact, the week before COVID hit was the week we gave it in person, and then the lockdown happened. And so we spent the next year trying to figure out how are we going to do this and engage the audience that we've kind of learned over the last couple of years. So that first image that you see was taking a large conference room and turning it into a giant green screen studio so that we could turn it into something which was more engaging. And then we did things like we hired a streaming company that was awesome, except the stream wouldn't come through the firewall, so lesson word number one. So we had to abandon that 3 weeks before we went live because I was the first person to say, maybe I should check this before we go live. And we said, we're going to do Zoom webinars, so we did that. But then we found we had presenters in multiple locations who weren't coming to the event, which is being live. So you can kind of see it in one of those images that we have Zooms within Zooms. So they're zooming in, and then we're zooming them out in the studio, back out again. So that was a fun learning experience by all means. But yeah, so we started that as a way of saying, okay, this is a way we can do these events. And so as we rolled around to last year, it was going to be in person because things were looking good. And then it was like, oh, it can't be in person because things were not looking good. So it was going to be virtual. And they said, oh, except our executives want to be there. So now it's hybrid. So we planned the entire event to go from in-person to fully virtual to then hybrid, which if you click the slide one more, you can get a feel for it. So that event was off-site. So as you can see, there's a stage because we were gonna be in person. I designed the whole background so that we can really engulf the audience, which we didn't have, but the executives were there. So we just turned the whole thing into a big production studio, which was kind of cool, because imagine that much space you have for doing production. And then that, we ran into things like checking bandwidth at hotels. That was always fun when they make promises they can't complete. But yeah, so we went from that trying to do it ourselves in that green screen environment to bringing in vendors to try and do it externally. And this year, we're going to try and do it in person. And interestingly enough, not a lot of discussion around making it virtual for anyone.